So what you probably noticed is as we move our can around, it moves a little bit too quickly, right? So I push my arrow key, it's moving really fast, it rotates really slow, it reverses really quickly. So there's got to be a way to clean this up, our code, so that we can control the move and turn speed. Well, a good way of doing that is by using variables. And we'll use a couple of float variables for this. So I'm going to make a public float and call this move speed. So we'll keep our naming conventions the same. And then we'll make another public float. We'll call this one turn speed. And this, remember what I told you before, this is called a vector. This is a vector 3 essentially. So it's 1, 2, and 3 properties within a vector, which means it's the x, y, and z axis, right? And z is our forward axis. So there's a shorthand way of sort of writing this. So if we write vector 3 dot, and you can see we have back, forward, um, a bunch of different attributes. So let's try vector 3 dot forward, and let's save that. And let's see if that does essentially the same thing. So we did vector 3 dot forward. You can see I'm pressing play. It's still very quick. Let's try normalizing it. Now, what's interesting is depending on the frame rate of your computer, that vector 3 forward is going to vary depending on how quick your processor or your graphics card is. So a way of leveraging that is by multiplying it by the time, like delta time, which essentially is going to normalize it by the clock speed in your computer. So what we do for that is we do times time dot delta time. So let's save that and play that, and let's see how that moves. And you can see now it moves pretty slowly, but it's a nice smooth and it's even opposed to jagged and jumping to what it was before. So what we did is we've added this move speed variable here. So I double click it, I copy it, and I'm going to multiply both of these by my move speed. Now you might be wondering, well, how do I adjust the move speed? Well, we can set it here to 1 and save it. And if we go back into our viewport and select our Cano model, you'll see we have our move speed here and our jump speed. So what a neat little trick is, as I'm moving my character, right, he's not moving because it's 0. So if I add a 5 here, and I click back in my game, you see that's pretty quick. I kind of like that. Let's do 10. You can see it moves a lot quicker. So again, our back isn't set up yet, right? So let's try that again. So let's go to our, let's go ahead and make this, I kind of like 10. And we'll go ahead and create, we'll edit our script as well so that it has a, we can adjust it so if you hold shift, he runs, the can runs. So let's do, let's try the down arrow, which is our moving our character back. So let's do vector 3 here dot, I've actually never tried back. Let's try see what back does. And then I'm just gonna copy this times move delta speed and all that good stuff. And paste that here and save it. And let's see if back does refer to the back arrow. So we have our forward. Yeah, that back seems to work. And we can sort of move around. Let's actually go ahead and let's clean up our left and right arrow to do the same thing, right? So vector 3. Now, you might say, oh, it's vector 3 dot left or right. It's actually not. The y-axis of our can points upward, right? That's our y-axis here. It's actually pointing up, and we're rotating on that upward velocity. So what we're actually going to change this to is vector 3 dot up. And for my left arrow, I'm going to do turn speed, which, let's go ahead and make this also equal to 1 and save that. We're going to do a negative turn speed. So vector 3 up, right? and we'll do times minus turn speed, and then we'll copy this too, times time.delta time. And let's see how that goes. Oh, you know what? I know what the problem is. So, um, this is actually a separate, we're doing vector 3 up, we're getting our vector 3 up, and then we're going to do our y as this axis. So let's save that and try that again. So I added a comma there. And we have oh, I know what the problem is. I'm sorry. Let's change that back. And then let's make sure that we have a turn speed in there. So let's press play here. There we go. There's our turn speed. Super slow. Let's make our turn speed like 50 and see what happens. Yeah, that's much better. Alright, so I'm going to set this to 50. You can set yours to whatever you like. And then I'm just going to finish off this section of the script by copying all of this and removing that minus, because minus is to the left, right? Because remember we were talking about, you go to the left, it's negative. You go to the right, it's positive, right? So now when I press play and I don't save it, let's make sure we get no errors in our code there. We got some movement going on here. Let's put in a little bit more time in our script here so we can start getting some animations, start coding our animations in the next video. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and set up our characters. So remember we have this Cano model, and we added something called an animation controller onto this model, right? This guy right here. Let's go ahead and set up and script our walk. So in this Cano controller, I'm going to double click it, and that's what's actually opening up this guy right here. Now our can itself, now we're inside of our models, characters, PC. We're actually looking at our can here. Remember we have this long animation here, right? So we press play, and we want to break this into individual chunks. Now if you remember, from frame 0 to 30, so let's go ahead and name this walk. And let's make it from 0 to 30. And now when I press play, you can see here's my looping animation. And I want to make sure that loops properly. So I'm going to go ahead and check on loop pose, and I'm going to hit apply. Now what happened is that walk actually got created right here. So if I drag this into my view here, and I go back to my scene and I press play, you can see my walk animation is playing, right? And that's because what's happening is at my entry point into the game, it runs continuously to that walk, right? So let's go ahead and right click and create a state, an empty state, and we're just going to call this idle. Now we never created an idle animation, and that's okay. We'll go back and do that later, but for right now I want to right click on this and I want to set this as my layer default state. Now when I press play, you're going to notice it's not going to walk because it's not triggered, but I have this idle state. What I'd like to do is, if I press the key down, it actually plays this walk animation. And what I'm going to do is, we're already at the 10-minute mark for this. In the next video, we'll go ahead and start scripting out and setting up our different animation controllers.